Hello and welcome back. So this was a presentation that was requested by a number of students on just how to move out and some general advice and guidelines. I'm just going to give you a fair warning in advance. So this might be a bit of a longer video, and I'm going to try to give you just some advice and feedback from my own personal experiences and also just some, guidelines just from the PowerPoint. So hopefully you enjoy. Okay, so just a bit of an overview. There's three main stages that I figured out and put together. So we got planning, preparing, and the move out day. Okay, so let's just get right into it. Stage one, planning. Very simple, very straightforward. Let's look at the concepts here. So you gotta ask yourself, do you wanna live alone? Do you wanna live with roommates? We got some pros and cons here for both sides. So, and with some of my other presentations that are on my YouTube page, go and check out the personality and temperament presentations. You got to ask yourself. I'm very extroverted, and so for me, like living alone would get a bit crazy. I tell my friends like if I lived alone, I'd have to get a cat because I need some sort of social contact, even though a cat can't really talk to you. But if you're less extroverted, then some pros of living alone is it's your house, your rules, you have peace and quiet, but some of the downsides. Rent is going to be very expensive, utilities, internet, all this other stuff that living with your parents you don't really think about because maybe your parents don't ask you to help out with that, or maybe you do have to help out with that and you know a little bit about that reality. But especially with the state of affairs right now, and I don't know what the future is going to look like, but it can be very expensive, paying your gas, your electricity, and all this extra stuff. Okay, some of the cons, and again, this is much very curated to my own temperament, but too much alone time, right? Not having anyone else to talk to and be around, that can be a con. And then everything is on you. So if the house gets dirty, messy, laundry, whatever it is, like it's all on you. Like no one else is living there, so there's no one else who can really say, hey, can you help me out? Like, can you help clean the kitchen? Can you help clean the bathroom? Like that is all on you. Whereas with roommates, some of the pros here are, well, you can live with friends or make new friends and have people to socialize with, which can be really awesome, especially if you're living with some people in your same age range or kind of close to you, and you can get to go out with them or go to events and whatnot. Rent can be cheaper as well because it's much cheaper to rent a room than it is to rent, let's say, an entire apartment or a bachelor suite as well. Kind of on both sides, you have shared responsibilities. It's a pro because someone else can throw out the trash and clean up the kitchen and clean the dishes. But at the same time, like if you're relying on someone else to clean the kitchen and throw out the trash and they don't do it, well, you're kind of hooped in that regard. Some of the other cons, living with strangers or people you may not like, that could be very complicated and difficult. You might have bad roommates, right? So, this girl I had dated in the past, she had issues with her roommates where her mindset was like, hey, dishes got to be cleaned within 3 days, 72 hours. She thought that was reasonable, and her roommate agreed to it, but at the same time her roommate just never cleaned the dishes and instead chose to stockpile them in her room, which you can foresee the problem that, hey, like a week later, 2 weeks later, it's like, hey, there's no dishes here, where are they? Oh, they're in the roommate's room and they won't clean them. So it can be tricky, right? But you'll have to manage. Do you want to live alone or by yourself? And to be honest, there's a time for both in your life, and you got to make that decision on your own. Location, another part of planning. Where do you want to live versus where can you afford to live? Like, yeah, it'd be nice to live in downtown in a penthouse suite, but ain't nobody got $3, $4, $5,000 a month to pay for that. Think about your social life and your work life. So I have in parenthesis the brackets, a 2 kilometer life. It's this concept that you live within two, let's say even up to 5 kilometers of where you work, where you socialize, go to have fun, and where you do your groceries, right? And that's something I practiced when I was in university, and it really worked out, and something I really like. It's kind of one of my only complaints about my job is that I have to drive about 35 minutes, but fortunately I love my job, so it's not much of an issue. But certainly driving an hour to work one way is an issue. So consider that, right? And what kind of people do you want to be surrounded by? So there's a neighborhood in downtown where it's a lot of younger people, more of a hip new area, not new, but more of a hip area. Whereas I live by the University of Alberta, and it's very chill here. There's a lot of older people, a lot of people renting, and a lot of homeowners, right? It's very relaxed. I'm by the river valley as well, so it's super cool. And then another one that my friend recommended, something he did, you could look into live-in caretaker positions for small apartments. So especially if you go to downtown, or I'm referring to Edmonton, right? I'm assuming most people would want to move closer to Edmonton, but if you're in a city, consider reaching out to the landlord or the owner and like saying, hey, do you need a live-in caretaker? That might entail you going around and making sure that the apartments are all clean and everything's tidy, whatever the job looks like. But in many cases, you might be able to get cheap or free accommodations, living arrangements. And so, that's definitely something worth considering in terms of where you want to move out to. Okay, and one thing that was really important for me, especially kind of moving out to where I am now, is like really setting a move out date. And what this does is it trains your body and mind to prepare kind of for the life you want versus the life you have. And this is also more related to just setting goals as well. It's like telling your mind like, hey, June 5th, 2023, I'm struggling to figure out what the date is. June 5th, 2023, 1 year from now, like I'm moving out on that date. It's final, it's set. Now, that's going to make you focus on some of the other stuff we'll talk about later, but saving your money and telling your friends. So, if you put your money where your mouth is and say like, hey, I'm moving out June 5th. If you don't move out June 5th, then your friends are going to be like, hey, like what's going on? Like I thought you said you were going to move out. You're not doing it. Which might, prompt you to reflect on the decisions you've been making over the last few years. So that's something to consider. And that last point at the end there as well. Again, keeping your parents, guardians, whoever it is, in the loop. Like, take it from me, because the first time I moved out, like, I kind of just did it on a whim. And so it was a bit necessary. Like, I realized I had to start becoming my own person. And the problem was that it was incredibly emotional. Like, I still remember when I moved out the first time that, I was kind of walking towards my car and I was about to get in, but I turned back and I looked and, my dad was kind of at the house at the door and my mom was a little bit further down the steps. And I told him like, hey, I'm going and I'm signing this lease. And I'm having trouble remembering all the details, but I just remember the look on my mom's face of like, she was clearly disappointed, both her and my dad, because of various reasons, but recognized that, and she just said to me, it's like, like, we want you to stay here, but we know you're going to do what you're going to do. And we've told you what we would like, so we're not going to stop you. But there's a lot of emotion, a lot of tension there, and fortunately, like I'm very low. I'm much lower on agreeableness, so it was easy for me to have that conflict and just say, I got to do what I got to do here to become my own man. But not everyone's going to be like that. If you're very high in agreeableness, like that conflict you might not be able to get past that. So preparing people ahead of time, letting them know, also prepares you for that date when it does arrive, when you move out. Okay, next stage is preparing, right? So now you've got this plan, you've started doing some thinking. Now you got to start preparing, right? Maybe you set a date, right? So let's look into what's next. So saving money and budgeting, man, this is very important, right? So learning how to budget can be difficult, and quite frankly, and for all my students who are watching this, damn well that they don't really teach you about how to budget or handle your money. And so my advice, and this is what I did and I found was very successful. So if you have a debit or credit card, all of these services have some sort of financial tracking. So figure out what you spent money on in the last 12 to 18 months and then organize that into categories. So some categories I had was bills, right? Because you got to pay those, right? You can't really fault on those. It's going to cause you problems. Groceries, you got to eat. And those are like the two main ones. But I also found a lot of success in just budgeting money for, eating out or going out, right? Because like you want to have fun too, and I'm a very social person. We all differ, but you want to add in categories for the stuff that you enjoy, right? So maybe you want to be able to buy things for your hobby, like maybe you like sewing or knitting, whatever it is, or you play some online game, and so every now and then you got to spend a bit of money on that, right? Budget that in there and have a limitation, right? That's the next point. And then the last major one for budgeting, like I can't stress this enough, and I've heard this on numerous different podcasts and people giving advice in this realm, is spend less than you earn. Like that is the key to financial success, right? If you're making $1,000 a month, make sure you're not budgeting past 800, right? Like you want to be able to put 10, maybe 15, 20% of your paycheck away into savings, especially if you need to get the hell out of whatever living situation you're in. It's very important. And then, my friend, again, he told me to add in like budgeting for future costs as well, right? So consider like, okay, if you're going to live by yourself or even with people, like how much might it cost you to pay for electricity, gas, water, internet, whatever this is. It's going to be very costly, right? So consider that into your finances, right? Like you might have to be paying, $200 to $600 just for utilities, just for other stuff you need to survive, especially if you're on your own, right? Like the house I'm in right now, where we're currently like in the process of finding a new place to live. But my friend, he's paying like $400, $500 just for heat and electricity, and it's summer, like it's warm out. So consider that, right? Also consider like, are you going to need a car? Because everyone sees a car and says, oh, it's a car, but they're not thinking about insurance, gas, maintenance, right? I mean, I just have to replace my windshield. That was $260. Now, that doesn't happen every day, but every 5 to 7,000 kilometers, you're going to have to do an oil change. And most people don't know how to do an oil change. Like, I'm learning how to do it right now. I'm actually going to go try and do it myself in a day or two here, right? But, like, you got to take care of your vehicle if you have one and if you need one. Right? Will you take public transportation? Because if you do, I mean, you're going to need to get a bus pass. And, if you're moving out after 18, like you need an adult's bus pass, which is like $80 to $120 a month, right? So just consider these things, right? Budget for your future as well. Okay, searching for potential locations. So there's a lot of ways of finding a rental property. I've listed a few. We got Facebook Marketplace, Kijiji, Rent Faster, find a website, go and look, right? But take into consideration the neighborhood, different schools in the area, right? Because like you don't want like some just suburban area and there's no schools, no nothing, and not because you're going to school, but because maybe maybe a neighborhood with a school has other amenities nearby, right? Like grocery stores and how close is it to whatever else you want to do. So when I was a bit younger, I liked to go out, and so living close to White Ave, which is kind of a lot of bars and whatnot are on that avenue, and you can go out and socialize. Like it was very nice to be able to walk there and walk back, right? So I didn't have to worry about driving, taking a cab or an Uber and whatnot, right? But you need to consider these things. Next part is reminders, right? So you're in the preparing phase. You got to remind those people. So the first time I moved out, I did it abruptly, and it was very emotional. It was very tense. But like the second time I moved out, I had planned about 6 to 8 months in advance, and which is easier for me to do because I'm a teacher and I was making more money. But if you're a teenager and you're making minimum wage, like you might need to plan out 2 years in advance. You might really need that time. But the second time I moved out, I was reminding my parents, like, hey, like every time they kind of brought up the issue, I'd just kind of give them a little elbow nudge of like, yeah, no, like I'm moving out of here. Like, just don't forget that. And over the 6 to 12, even 18 months, because kind of it's a longer process I'm not going to get into, but during that time, like I was reminding my parents, like, hey, I'm living with you now, because partially it was because I was finishing university and was still sorting out my finances, but my plan is to continue to live on my own and be my own man, because that's what I like. That's where it's best for both me and them, particularly me, right? So, and be subtle about this. Like you don't need to like dig it into them, like I'm leaving you, right? Because your parents, whether you think it or not, like they do love you and they care about you, and they may not even realize what they're doing in the harm, but just keep people in the loop, give them reminders, right, and be gentle with it. Okay, last stage is move out day, right? So you've made a plan, you start preparing and whatnot. Now you're in the process of moving out. So pre-signing checklist. This is super important because I didn't do this the first time I moved out, and I'll tell you some stories. While I tell you stories, feel free to read the list. But the first room I rented out, I'm actually currently living with my friend, who him and I ended up just living together in that space by chance, and it was very fortunate friendship. We've been a both positive influence on each other's lives, but I saw the room, kind of looked around, said, hey, this is good, I'm going to sign a lease. I didn't consider that room was right beside the bathroom, and it's kind of gross. You can hear people using the washroom. That wasn't fun. I did that for a year. Also, just a bit of a stroke of bad luck. I mean, as people were moving into this house, a mouse had also moved in, and it decided to move into my room, and it decided to live between my closet, and at night it would kind of run around the room and go into the ducts downstairs and do whatever it did. And my pride got the best of me. I didn't want to tell my parents that there was a mouse living in my room, because I didn't want to have them poke and laugh and say, like, hey, like, we told you not to move out and now you got to live with a mouse. Like, how's that for a roommate? And so I lived with this mouse for a year and a half, and eventually this one day, I had a PS4 at the time, and I stopped using it because I was focused on other things, so I put it back into its box. And so this one day I noticed that the mouse had gone down the vent into the basement, and I quickly put the PS4 on top of the vent, and the vent was, my bed was just over top. So there was the vent, the PS4 box, and the bed. And I remember late at night this one time, you could hear the mouse like scratching and clawing, trying to get through this PS4 box, but it just couldn't, because, it's a solid object and there was stuff in there. But so consider some of these things you want to check. Like, if you're sitting in the room and it's silent, like, what else can you hear? Can you hear people downstairs in the other rooms? Can you hear what's happening in the washroom? Check the windows. Are they new windows? Are they old? Are they easy to open and close? Is there mold all over them? Ice, if you're checking out the room in winter, you got to consider these things. They may not seem important to you if you're in grade 10 or 11, but they're very important when you're living in that room. Temperature as well. If it's the middle of summer and the room is just ice cold, it's like, you got to wonder, is it going to be frigid in winter, right? Again, that girl I was dating, like, the apartment she was living in, the room, the windows were terrible, and the room was just god awfully cold. It was terrible. It was not fun, and she did not enjoy it. I didn't enjoy it, and I barely spent any time in there. But and then check the other rooms in the house, right? Like, how clean is the kitchen? How clean is the living room? And if that matters to you, right? Because I'm very high in orderliness and I like clean things, but just give it a look around, right? Like, what else is going on in this house? And then depending on how concerned you are, consider the safety. Like, are there locks on the main door? Does the door get locked? What about the bedrooms, right? Because I live with people that I trust, and so, like, I'll just leave my door open. Like, I don't really care, and I have like a few $100s sitting on my dresser back there, and like, I'm not really concerned about it disappearing, because I know that I can trust the people I live with. And even if the house gets robbed, like, I'll figure something out. And right, but consider that, right? Who you're living with and what the security is, right? And the main point at the top is have patience. And I don't know everyone's situation who's watching this, and maybe you're in an abusive relationship with your parents and you got to get out of there. But other than extreme circumstances, like, have patience. There's no rush. Consider like, find a space that works for you. Don't just rush right into it. It's not really worth it, because you don't want to be locked into some room that you hate in a place that you hate, and it's difficult for work and like whatnot, right? So consider that as well. Organizing your possessions, I'd highly recommend, check out Marie Kondo's work. She's got a very good method of getting rid of old and unused items. But consider, especially if it's your child at home and you've been living with your parents from like 0 to 18, and you got all this extra stuff, like, go through your stuff, figure out what you want, figure out what you don't want, get rid of it, right? Less is better, because especially if you're, I'm teaching in Leduc at the moment that I'm making this video, and if you're moving from Leduc to Edmonton, it's going to be a bit tough to carry all this stuff. And so really, like, consider getting rid of some stuff and considering what you want to take with you, what you're going to leave behind. Because even right now, I have so much stuff in my parents' house that sentimental things, some old stuff, some old clothes and whatnot that just stay there. Put things into boxes. I've through my mosque, I've helped so many people move in. Oh my God, like, having to drag stuff out by hand that's not even in a box, not even wrapped up. It's just so annoying. If you want people to help you out with moving, your friends, make it easy on them as well. Put stuff in boxes, label the box, because you're going to forget what you put in there, and you want to know where the important stuff is. So you can buy some of these boxes, or you can just go to a grocery or liquor store and get some old boxes from them if they're willing to give you some of that stuff. Last point there, like, a moving vehicle might be difficult to figure out if you're 17, 18, 19 years old, and maybe you don't have your own license and whatnot. But maybe you can ask a friend. You might have to do multiple trips, and people are willing to help you out. If they scratch your back, scratch their back. Like, I've had a lot of pizza dinners after helping people move. But take that into consideration. Last but not least here, saying goodbye, right? Say goodbye to your old living arrangement. but not to your old relationship. So the first time I moved out, again, because it was done so abruptly, and I've gotten over it, but for a while it bothered me that my parents never actually came and visited the place where I lived. They never really asked about it. They didn't really they didn't express any interest in wanting to see it. So I almost felt like, hey, you don't really love me and you don't really respect and appreciate and support what I'm doing. So that was kind of painful, right? But hopefully, with this video, you can avoid some of those mistakes that I made. And just keep in mind, like, just because you're moving somewhere doesn't mean you're leaving everyone behind or that everyone's dead and you can't interact with them, especially your parents and family. Like, figure out what kind of dynamic and relationship you want to have with them and try to manage that. Like, don't do what I did when I started traveling and moving out. Like, for a long time, I just didn't talk to my parents. I was being a complete a-hole. It was rude. And, whereas now I'm much older now, I'm 25, almost 26, I make sure to go and visit my parents a few times. Like, some weeks I visit them 3 times and some twice and sometimes only once. But I recognize I have a very limited amount of time with my parents, and I love them and they love me, and it can be difficult at times. But like, it's an important relationship. Try to work on it, and try to be as mature about it as you can. And again, your individual circumstances going to be very dependent upon you and whatever's going on. My situation is very different, but just try to make a mature decision and handle that as an adult, I would say. Last but not least, cheers. If you've gone through this whole thing and maybe you watched it multiple times because you've actually attempted to implement some of the processes, cheers to you. And if you're listening to this and you're one of my students, please put down in the comments, what you liked about the PowerPoint, what you still feel like is missing, okay? Because I would love to improve this and figure it out. Other than that, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. Bye.